Hello, welcome to EverydayHDR.com. I'm Blake Rudis, and today I want to talk about how to look at a photograph and see what it needs to make it look a little bit better. And there's some steps that you can take to get to that point. Now, how this came about was on EverydayHDRinsider.com. That's HDRinsider.com. I do photo critiques once a month where I allow people to send me photographs via email, and then I compile them for a video tutorial where I give as long as it takes to go through each photograph and say what works, what doesn't work, and what can be done to make better. Now, I do pay particular attention to artistic expression as well as the technical qualities of the HDR images. So I do keep that in mind while I do the critiques, and a lot of the stuff is solely based on opinion. But when I look at these photographs, I diagnose what can be done to make them look better, or if they're looking great already, I just talk about what works with it and where they are on point. Now, as you watch those critiques, you can see what other people are doing, and you can see what you can do to make your photograph better. Now, this photograph came courtesy of Michael Cross. He is an HDR Insider member, and during the HDR critique, I did some stuff that he thought was actually very impressive, and he wanted other people to see it in his photo community. So I figured I would put it here on EverydayHDR.com so that you could see it as well. Now, looking at Michael Cross's image, it was very difficult for me to find too much error in it. I like the crop. I like the composition. I like the subject matter. I'm very partial to the beach. I don't mind the highlight blowouts over here. But what I do feel is that when I looked at this photograph, something was missing. So every time I get to that point with myself, when I'd say, hey Blake, what are you doing with this photograph, and what can you do to make it better? The first thing I do is turn the image into black and white. There's many ways you can turn a photograph into black and white. The easiest is if you just go to your into your layers palette, make a new adjustment layer, make a gradient map. So what the gradient map does is the gradient map is kind of like the zone system for Ansel Adams photography. If you look at the zone system is a very specific way that you can look for pure black and pure white in a photograph, and then every gradient that happens in between. Well, when you make a gradient map, it looks at your photograph and it maps out where each one of the colors would rest on a 0 to 10 scale, I guess, if you want to put it that way, into the zone system. In the digital world, it's not quite that 0 to 10 and specific, but it puts all of the tones of your colors onto specific points of your photograph. So when you look at this, if you look at this photograph and you can't see too much black and you can't see too much white, now there's ways that you can make that photograph look better. Now, because I have the gradient map there, I'm also going to make a levels adjustment and see what happens when I do this. If I press and hold Alt or Option on the black on the left hand side, you'll see that there is no black in this photograph. And I know that because when you press Alt or Option, it tells you where your blacks are clipping or where your blacks maybe even exist. If I click on the right hand side, I can see that there's very little actual white in this photograph. So if there were black in this photograph, as I move this over, you'd start to see black start to appear. And then if I move this over, you'll start to see where whites start to appear. And that's where you've clipped your blacks and your whites. Now, if I were to undo that levels, now in that levels adjustment, we see just from that levels adjustment alone, I've created more dynamic range between black and white. If I were to deselect this gradient map, I can see that that has done a lot for not only the color, but also for the contrast between light and dark in that photograph. So again, working in black and white will make you a better color photographer, because it's just a lot easier to see color range and color tone and where it's missing when you turn the image into black and white. If you turn it into black and white and it looks like a gray photo, just a straight gray photo with no black and no white in it, you know that it needs a little bit of work. So what you can also do is do a curves adjustment layer. A lot of this stuff can be done in curves as well. If I just go ahead and delete this levels layer, I'll show you the curves adjustment, how you can do this in just the curves alone. So again, the same thing here. If I press Alt or Option on the black, I can see this is basically like your levels down here. It's very similar to levels, if not the exact same thing. If I were to move that over, that shows me where my black starts to clip, where black starts to appear. Let's just say that. Instead of where black clips, let's say where black appears. And if I go over to the right-hand side, I can see where white starts to appear. So now I've already adjusted my my starting point of my curve to be in the range of where black is and where white is. Now I can make those darks darker by pulling down the darks. Over here, this is the dark portion, and up here is the light portion. So let's see where that leaves me on a color photograph. So if I were to undo that one curve alone did a serious amount of help for this photograph to not only bring out the lights and darks and the difference in between, but also to pull in some of this color. Now, if I were to deselect it, this still was a great photograph to begin with. But just with that one simple curve and that ability to diagnose a photograph through a black and white image to start with, really had me going in the right direction. Now, you can do the same thing after this, diagnosing it further. You could go in and do a hue saturation adjustment if you wanted to. You could bump up the saturation to increase those colors. I would say stay a little far away from going too high with that, because you'll start to see that makes everything look nasty. You can go into the individual colors though, and you can, let's say I wanted to bump up the color of the sky. I could click on the cyans and I could increase the color of the sky. Now that targeted adjustment tool is going to be your tool of choice to detect what colors need to increase. So let me click into the water. The water is basically cyan. So that water looks a little too blue for me. I can change the hue of it, and as I change that hue, I can make it lighter, or actually not lighter, or darker. It changes the actual color hue of it. Let me decrease that saturation a little bit. So change it to more of a ocean-looking color. Now, the oceans here in America don't tend to be that clear and blue, so that's what I know of that ocean. But what Michael might know in his part of the world, that might be the color of the water. And if that's the case, just go ahead and leave that alone. Again, you can use that targeted adjustment tool to maybe click back here into the greens, and you can increase the color of the greens if you'd like to bring out some of that foliage in the background. I would choose to make that actually a little bit darker though. See how it gets darker when we move that back? That pushes that background further back into the background, and then you can decrease or increase the saturation. So again, a great photograph to start. But you can see with just those two simple adjustments, by looking at the color and looking at the curve, more so in the form of a black and white photograph, we have created something even better so that Michael could kick off with this. So again, this came from an HDR Insider photo critique. If you're interested in these types of photo critiques, you have to become a member of HDR Insider. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about that, but it's very cheap. It's $1.99 a month or $20 a year, and you get access to all kinds of stuff that I don't do for everydayhdr.com, and you won't see those videos here on YouTube because I do them on another site so that they're specific to HDR Insider. Again, Blake Rudis here. This was diagnosing a photograph to see what you could do to make it look better, give it that more punch, and really start to wow your friends in your photo community. Have a great one.